Welcome back, everyone. Thanks again for joining me. I can't believe this is like episode 12 or day 12, whatever you want to count it as. We had Kelly ask a really good question, and it was around fonts, and it was part of the exercise where I asked you all to kind of go and find some fonts, and this is a website that she found. If you go and you look at this, there's a really nice font here with some really cool things, but that's actually a logo, and then there's this really nice font down the bottom. Now we can see that that logo is getting moved and resized and repositioned on that page. If you kind of move the window around, but you can also see this text is there, and these are little hover rollover effects and things like that. So if you go and right click and you go inspect element, and you bring up this panel which we've been looking at before, just that one. What you're seeing is the highlighted version here, which is the about text. And as we played around with it before, we could say, this could be hello or anything else that you want to change it to, which just changes it for your display. But what we were looking at specifically is like what font is being used here. And as part of looking at this, Kelly had a question around what she found. And there's this example here of dash WebKit dash transition. And if you notice that this animation here kind of transitions the color in 0.4 of a second, and that's nearly half a second, and that transition, that WebKit transition, is getting superseded by this transition. And the question was around these WebKit things, and I just wanted to quickly explain. I mean that we could talk for an hour about it, but I'm just going to show you and then get you to kind of do your own research. But WebKit or this Moz or these other things, they're all basically called vendor prefixes. And if you looked for vendor prefixes, what it means is basically if something has a dash WebKit dash in front of it, it's just there as an experimental feature for a specific browser. And Google's Chrome and Apple Safari and some versions of Opera, they're all part of the WebKit family. They all use the same logic to make a web page appear. Firefox uses Moz, old versions of Opera use O, and Microsoft's Internet Explorer uses the MS prefixes. So in CSS, you might see these and go, oh, why does this special effect work in Firefox, or why does it work in Chrome and it doesn't work in the other browsers? And that's because it's experimental. So for example, there's this WebKit font smoothing anti-aliased, and there's a little error message here saying that it's an invalid property value because I'm using Firefox. So I'm using Firefox. Firefox doesn't know this one, so it's not really happy with this particular property for this particular bit of text. But if you were to look at it in Chrome or Safari, you would see a different effect because, again, this experimental property is there and it's kind of temporarily there. Now, what happens as the web kind of matures and gets older and kind of learns these things, the little prefixes disappear and then this thing appears, which is basically the same word like box sizing but without the prefix. And then that overrules these other two, which is why they're kind of crossed out. So WebKit box sizing and Moz box sizing get overruled by box sizing because now that's become part of the standard. So once it becomes part of the standard, they get rid of the prefixes, and whoever introduced it gets, the applause for coming up with a really good idea. But in the meantime, it allows them to come up with new ideas without having to get everyone else on board and without having to get everyone else to agree. So it's a very cool thing, and it's more of a recent thing. We're talking the last 5 years where it's prevalent that these browser manufacturers are like, look, I want to try something, let's give it a go. And previous to that, we all had to wait until they all agreed, and then it was released as part of the rules for HTML, for CSS. Whereas now we've got a little bit more leeway. So those are kind of cool things there as well. The other thing I wanted to point out is, between the computed and the rules basically shows you what CSS is written. Computed tells you what the computer actually sees. So if you scroll through this, you'll see that these are all the different settings, and a lot of them are defaults, meaning that the person who made this web page didn't set them. These are just the default values. But you can see here the font family of Interstate and Sans Serif. So that's basically the font family that's set for this particular bit of text that I had highlighted. And then there's some other settings here, like your kerning, your size, your stretch, your style, your variance. All these things being set to defaults. So you can see most of them are normal, so they don't actually affect the font in any way. And then you can just scroll through and look at the line height, the list styles, the margins. All of these things just show you what the defaults for that is. And again, because I am in a Firefox, I get the little dash moz border bottom colors, which allows me to modify these if I wanted to try them. But again, if you're trying this in Chrome or Safari, you will get the WebKit variants at the bottom there because you'll be using that particular browser. So wrapping it up, browsers make a difference. Browsers actually impact on how your page is rendered. These days, a lot of them are very similar, so it's not a big a deal as it was, 10, 15 years ago. But it is still something that you need to be aware of, that your page is being shown and displayed and interpreted by the browser of choice, and the browser of choice is a person's browser. So you're always going to have a little variation on what your page looks like between these browsers. Then you might need to do some work around that to get that all aligned. Anyway, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed, and this was a little bit of an insightful kind of look at all of this stuff. We'll do some more exciting things next day. But again, leave us your comments so that we know what we need to focus on and show you, and we'll be happy to make some videos about that. All right. Thanks, guys.